Welcome to Uncensored Crypto. My name is Mike. If you're here, you no doubt share my interest and curiosity about decentralized currency, the blockchain, and possibly my passion for a better future. You're about to discover the greatest force of our lifetime. See the episode I'm about to share? All of you watching it go up in your head. I check the curious. And if you're here, you're probably both. If this is your first dip of a toe into the water of decentralized technologies, of aware knowledge, I want to thank you. Really adopt every new industry are the ones who get the majority of the spoils. People who can adapt and adopt get second wave or get washed out to sea. Ask me why the railroad didn't become the airline giants. They thought they were in the train business, not the transportation business. Be fair, you and me, we have the moments of all this technology promises. You know this. The world is about to change. Money in all its forms has already changed, as Bitcoin, Ethereum, and more are proving. Yet this change is much larger than currency. It's more monumental than Gutenberg's invention of the printing press. It will create more business change and efficiencies than personal computing did. It's guaranteed to make more impact on your personal existence in the world than the internet has, and it is our only hope of solving many of the problems we face as a society today, of reclaiming our natural rights, putting a stop to censorship, and stopping inflation. It's not big. It's not huge. It is literally a monumental shift in humanity in the way we will govern, provide security, wage war, and preserve peace. Even the rumblings you are hearing of the metaverse will be firmly built on the foundations you're about to explore. In our lifetime, we will solve world hunger, eradicate most diseases, and solve renewable clean energy. Those who do it will be the winners, not just financial winners, the moral and ethical winners, and the ones whom history will remember. Our Carnegies, our Vanderbilts, our Pasteurs, Armstrongs, and Martin Luther Kings to come are watching this right now. The future of mankind is in our audience right now. I firmly believe this. So where do you get? Let's find out, because after all, if this life is anything, it's a choose your own adventure matrix. What will you choose to become? Who will you choose to become? Then once you decide, how will you earn a living? Or will earning a living be a thing of the past? These are huge questions for humanity. I'm excited you're here. We've spent the last decade building the trusted relationships that allowed me to bring this to life, and spent months on the road filming this epic journey that you're about to take with me. We've put together these interviews in a specific order. Don't skip a single one, because the knowledge ties together over the whole story that's about to be revealed. I guarantee every single person you're about to meet will have a new insight for you. They'll offer one or even a dozen thoughts and perspectives that you may need to process. They certainly did for me, and I thought I knew a thing or two going into this series. Enjoy this episode. It's going to get us on the same page together, and then I'll be back to check in with you in just a bit. Here we go. Welcome to Uncensored Crypto. Buckminster Fuller famously said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." In the fall of 2008, a new model was born that made the monetary system obsolete. Since then, this technology has expanded and evolved to make most of the systems we depend on today obsolete. It's only a matter of time till the old ways disappear completely. This is the history of man. The superior technology always wins, and today is no different.
Could you talk a little bit about where this idea of digital money came into your world?
Well, for me, it started with, I guess what you'd call play money. I'm a byproduct of the first generation of kids with computers and internet connections, as well as early video games and, collectible card games.
Yeah.
And so as a result of that, collecting, buying, selling, trading, and when the first video games became networked, really in the late 90s as we got graphical interfaces, Ultima Online, EverQuest, eventually World of Warcraft, Second Life, I was one of the first people to recognize that just because something was intangible didn't make it less valuable. And so I was the primary market maker for digital currency and digital goods in all of these virtual worlds or virtual nations. And we built up a supply chain of about 400,000 people, primarily in China, that would play or live in these virtual worlds and mine digital currency. We were PayPal's largest merchant for years, Google's largest advertiser for a little while in the early days. We were instrumental in the launch of Alipay, and so I became deeply familiar with cross-border payments.
What year did that come onto your radar?
Until 2012, where it was like, okay, we're starting to achieve enough of us.
Yeah.
The momentum is building because it was clear that this or something like it was the future. The question is the future now or 10 years from now.
Right.
And it for me, where I'm like, okay, I have to stop everything that I'm doing and make this really my sole focus. And that's was in 2012.
So what kind of impacts did you foresee this having?
Well, I mean, philosophically, let's take it just a step back and what is happening here?
Yeah.
What is this technology doing? What is Bitcoin, bringing to the world? It's bringing accountability back in a world that is severely lacking in it. Bringing transparency, right, into a world that it has far too much opacity.
Yeah.
It's bringing democratization to tools or utility as well as opportunity. In a world where 4 to 4.5 billion people on the planet are on or underbanked.
Yeah.
Financial opportunity has historically really only been available to the elite.
Yeah.
And the idea that you're democratizing the tools as well as the opportunities, these are game-changing things that have the ability to change the world in a way that it makes it more fair.
Yeah.
Brings fairness. We are really at that point right now where probably within the next 12 months, whether people realize it or not, we're having that impact. I mean, take a look at what's going on in El Salvador right now. So President Bukele pushed forward a law to make Bitcoin legal tender or currency, which has a lot of big implications, and we can double click on that if you like. But the law was implemented, and they decided to enact it, fully implement it within 90 days from the law being passed. 90 days for a startup is aggressive.
Yeah.
For a government, it's unheard of. Talk about an entrepreneurial spirit.
Right.
And it got done. And it took a lot of people from around the world basically moving down there to assist the government in this rollout.
Yeah.
Within 30 days of Bitcoin Day happening on September 7th, within 30 days, a majority of the population had downloaded the Bitcoin wallet, the Chivo wallet, in 30 days. Within 90 days, over 70%. So talk about flipping the script.
Yeah.
30% of the population having financial tools within 90 days of the Bitcoin law taking effect, 70%. It completely turned the numbers upside down. And the issues of financial inclusion in the world, this isn't a new conversation.
Yeah.
This has been a conversation going on for a decade or two. But with all this time, no one has really been able to put a dent in it.
Yeah.
But Bitcoin did.
Yeah, in 60 days.
90 days. But 30 days to half the country, 90 days to more than 2/3, literally turning the numbers completely upside down on their head. And we're seeing other things. My friend Mayor Suarez in Miami obviously is doing big things there, saying to everyone in the United States, Miami embraces the future. Miami is not going to stay stuck in the 20th century. Miami is saying yes to the future, yes to the 21st century. He announced he's going to take his next paycheck in Bitcoin. And then the new mayor of New York City, the mayor-elect Eric Adams, within 24 hours said, I'm going to take my next 3 paychecks in Bitcoin. And the mayor of New York City making that statement, the capital of capital, that's a big deal. And others have now followed suit around the world. And so what we're seeing is a chain, a blockchain reaction, kind of dominoes falling.
Yeah.
It's all happening. And so I think we're at that kind of tipping point, that inflection point, where we're going to see sort of mass adoption. The technology is getting to that point where it's almost scalable enough to meet the market needs. The usability or the interface is getting friendly enough. The storytellers, are here and collecting the story to be able to deliver it in a clear, concise, simple enough way that that the masses can get involved. And so I'm, as challenging as a time we live in, I'm very optimistic about our future.
In I'm going to say 2015, 2016, a technical colleague of mine said to me, we really should start looking at this blockchain stuff. And I said, well, blockchain is just a sequential file. It's only going to be really relevant if you can take all the data that sits in databases and put it on the blockchain, but you have to have performance and capacity issues. And back then, the blockchain didn't really have the capacity or performance issues, at least some of the technologies that companies were making available. And he said, no, we got to look at Bitcoin. I said, okay, let's look at that.
What was it about, Bitcoin that made you think, okay, I'm going to invest myself into this technology?
So if you think about value creation, you create value when you can solve a very expensive problem for people, or when you enable something that can't be done. In the financial world, it takes 3 days typically for money to move from one place to another, for stocks to clear. Is this kind of what's called T3 concept that exists. And that costs a lot of money. If you could take T3 down to T0 and you had instantaneous settlement, where if you think about the way Zelle works today in the US, I can send you money on my smartphone. That actually still takes 3 days to happen. It's just the bank is saying, okay, I'll credit the amount, and then the banks clear with each other. The SWIFT system, how we send money internationally, was originally designed in the 70s as a telex-based text messaging system that one bank would send money to the other. It's still the primary way we send money internationally. So you had these archaic old systems that were designed around no need for speed in a world where people had a need for speed. And all of those hops that a transaction had to take between different entities, they all extracted their pound of flesh in transaction fees. And so if you can remove the friction process and you can make it more cost effective, that should be something that will be very valuable. And so that was the driving light for me. How can you help people get money from point A to point B faster? How can you facilitate commerce happening much faster? How can you automate and remove the need for people to be involved and intermediaries to be involved in things like contractual agreements? You automate all that using the blockchain and token-based systems with smart contracts. And so my thought was, we are at the cusp of something that is equal to what the internet was in 1995. And lo and behold, we're kind of going through that phase today. And if you think about how quickly the iPhone and smartphone technology permeated our society, we're seeing something very similar with cryptocurrencies today. So I'm a big believer that the blockchain is really going to revolutionize how we do things, and that the financial markets and payments is just the first application. It's kind of like the whole concept of e-commerce was kind of the killer app for the internet. Well, finance is kind of the killer app for Bitcoin and blockchain. And now we're going to see a huge growth in this industry. And I'm super excited about that. But the ability for people to exchange information directly with each other and share that data, I think, is going to be really the biggest use case for it. It's this using your personal data, your medical data. KYC, for example. You go open a bank account, you have to go show all the same information to one bank that you then have to go show to another bank, and it's your utility bill and where do you earn your money. Imagine if you just had a token you could share. You want my KYC? Bingo, here's a token. Look at the token, validate it. Token expires, they can't see the information anymore. Privacy and identity management, I think, are going to be huge. Healthcare is going to be huge. And then anything having to do with ownership, property, art, stocks, all of that. It's just ownership data. It's going to be huge. The Bitcoin blockchain is just a base layer. It's a network. It's the applications built on layer 2 and above that are going to be key. Just like Ethereum is a platform, it's not a network in the sense the way Bitcoin is. It's a platform for developing applications on it. And it's super easy to develop applications. And because it has a unifying currency, it makes all of these DeFi applications interoperate very easily. But I think we're going to start seeing a migration towards the Bitcoin blockchain as the foundation because of its security, its decentralized nature, just being kind of the better platform, I think, longer term.
You have been involved in crypto for a long time. What was your...
my entire adult life.
Yeah. So how did that happen? What was your first experience?
Oh, well, it was a combination of things. I first came across Bitcoin in 2011 when it was mentioned in Rolling Stone. They had an article on this black market Amazon.com, and I was like, oh, that sounds cool. And it was the Silk Road. And I figured out how to get on the Silk Road. I was enamored. I was like, this is awesome. And then I tried to figure out the Bitcoin thing, and I was like, nope. This is too complicated. You had to go to this like sketchy website called Mt. Gox. I was just like, I don't know about this. So I actually never ended up buying Bitcoin back then. But for me, what brought me back was that around that time, I was super involved with Occupy Wall Street, which had just sprung up. I was at school 2 hours north. I had a really liberal upbringing, which was kind of rare in crypto in those days, but it had driven me to Occupy. I had seen what the banks had done in the financial crisis, seen what they had gotten away with, and I was angry like a lot of people. And so I got to see firsthand how poorly activism works for changing the financial system. Right. So that kind of went out the window. I read some articles by Vitalik. I read white paper. I watched a video series on YouTube that Charles Hoskinson had made, and I caught the bug. I was like, and it wasn't from the perspective that so many people had at that time, which was very libertarian or cypherpunk or anarchistic. It was like me, a full-blown registered Democrat, like saw this system that enabled people to be their own bank. Blockchain technology wasn't a term yet, but this idea of being able to transfer value over the web without a middleman was incredibly compelling to me.
What's a simple way for people to understand what a blockchain is?
A blockchain is just a database. You can have a database really on paper, but people think of databases on computers. But instead of there just being one copy of the database as historically worked, you have thousands of copies being stored on computers all around the world, and all those computers are validating every single transaction that occurs that's getting logged into that database. So that those transactions can be monetary with Bitcoin, but it can be as complicated as those in the smart contracts happening on Ethereum. But fundamentally, what matters is that you have this incredibly powerful, trustless source of truth where that database can never be altered. It is physically, from a computer science perspective, nearly impossible for a well-secured blockchain to ever be altered. There are theoretical attacks, but it's never occurred on a major blockchain because there's so much computing power securing the network from all around the world. So what you have is a trustless computer network that allows for the transfer of value, whatever that value is determined to be online, can be transferred on a blockchain and stored in this database or ledger. And it's a very powerful concept once you begin to realize how many areas of our lives depend on intermediaries and trust, and how much of what we do centers around the concept of value. And so when you can take any form of value and put it online and not require a middleman, and transfer that value to anybody anywhere in the world with an internet, begin to realize the broad ramifications of this technology.
What excites you about the technology today?
Well, similar to many of the libertarians, anarchists, cypherpunks that I often couldn't relate to in the early days at an ideological level, what excites me about Bitcoin and everything that has come out, sovereignty, idea that you have the ability to transact in a whole world of ways in a sovereign, individual manner in which there's no government oversight, there's no large corporation watching what you're doing. It gives you privacy, it gives you autonomy. I'm, more of a statist, as they call them most, and I don't mind the role of government in my life up to a certain extent. But the idea that all my financial transactions are being monitored, the fact that everything I do online is being monitored and collected, that's frightening to me. They call it surveillance capitalism, and it feels so normal now because everything we do is being surveilled and it's just part of our lives. But literally 25 years ago, 20 years ago, even 15 years ago, that really wasn't the case. And so our world, humanity has shifted so dramatically, and our sense of privacy and personal autonomy has just vanished. And before our eyes, and it's not even like the old people are like, look out, we've seen this before. There's nothing like this to compare what's happened to our, human beings as what's happened with social media and the web. And so we live in this age where any tool that can be used for greater freedoms, greater privacy, I mean, it's so important. And so there's so much of what's going on in the crypto landscape, harnessing this blockchain technology that enables greater privacy and greater autonomy, whether it's, storing files on Filecoin, whether it's, just doing US dollar transactions with like USDC or Tether, just normal e-commerce. I mean, that concept of being able to not have prying eyes all the time as we spend more and more of our lives online is it's existential almost, because one days we may have this singularity where supercomputers develop consciousness and they soon become smarter and more powerful than we are, and they have all of our fucking data. They know everything about us. They know what makes us tick. They know they know what makes us sad. They know how to manipulate us and control us. I try not to be like an AI alarmist or doomsdayer, but there is a world in which the use of our data and information gets really out of hand. But as Edward Snowden shows, it can just be the NSA, it can be the FBI, it can be other humans that are, or the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, where they can be taking what we're doing and not using it for the most ethical means. And so it's a tool for freedom. It's a tool for privacy. Applications run the gamut. I mean, we're at a point where it's possible to imagine anything from Amazon to Facebook to Twitter to Uber potentially running on a blockchain. Now, there are lots of questions there about whether that would ever be feasible or be done, but it could be done. There is a world in which that happens. And very likely our lives could be made much better by that, because we don't know what's going to happen in this age of surveillance capitalism, but it's quite.
If you're starting to get excited, stand by to be even more amazed as you discover decentralized finance, DeFi for short, and how this new technology is going to do to financial institutions what Uber did to taxi companies. Many consider this to be the most exciting sector of all in crypto. And after the experts in this next segment explain the opportunity, you'll understand why. But beyond the yields and the capital gains, this sector has the potential to unlock trillions in trapped value and to raise billions of people out of poverty across the globe. So put a pillow under your jaw on the floor and disperse the future world of finance.
There's a proverb that says, money solves all things. You know, and it actually, the real translation of it says money solves almost all things. It doesn't solve all things, but it solves almost all things. And I can tell you it's a lot easier with money than it is without money, you know. And so people should be looking at these types of vehicles to, you know, to obviously expand their net worth and increase, increase their wealth. And I think if you're not, it's only either because you're just too lazy to do it, or you bought into the narrative that again it's a scam, or it's for money laundering or things like that. And so I think we've seen Bitcoin go up to $63,000. We've seen a lot of these other cryptocurrencies explode over the years, and people might say, well, is all the opportunity gone? Absolutely not. The opportunity is actually just getting started, because as it kind of these things that we're talking about from this perspective, I think that these types of assets and these types of technologies really shine.
How does investors participate in that? How do they accelerate that?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's three ways you can really invest in cryptocurrencies. I mean, you have the first way, which is, you look at buying and holding kind of like the blue chip cryptocurrencies, right? So Bitcoin, Ethereum, Stellar Lumens, and others, Ripple, and so on, that most people probably already know about, right? So you can buy and hold. You can use a simple dollar cost averaging system, right, and put money into Bitcoin. I always tell people, look, I mean, you should just own some Bitcoin, and you should just hold on to it. Hold on to it forever, really, because, people thought I was crazy when I said Bitcoin would go to 20,000 and when it would go to 30,000 and 40,000. And I know there's some astronomical claims out there about Bitcoin going to 500,000 or $1 million per coin, per token. That's very feasible, because once you understand the limited supply, you understand demand and supply, it's feasible that it could go to those levels. And so even if somebody owned a Satoshi at $1 million, which is a Satoshi is the smallest increment in a Bitcoin, it's 9 decimal places. And I'm going to keep going going fiat. You can break down $1 into 100 pennies. So people always say, well, Bitcoin is $42,000 now, or when it was 63,000, they were like, well, who could own a Bitcoin, or you can own a Bitcoin. You don't have to own the whole thing at once. Like Diesel did, or I didn't buy $1,000 like people to do back in 2016 and 2017. There's still opportunity, because this market is going to keep going. That's just, it's not going anywhere. It's embedded in, and it's getting more and more traction. It's becoming more mainstream. The regulators can't really do much about it at this point. They can try to curb it, but at the end of the day, I really do believe it's going to continue to grow. So that's one way that people can invest, and you can do that by opening up an exchange account. Again, if you're in the U.S., if you're outside of the U.S., there's plenty of other regulated options. You can do it centralized exchange. There's a number of ways you can actually buy it. For people that don't have access to that, they can still buy it through a peer-to-peer network. So they can go on to a peer-to-peer network, and maybe they have money in a PayPal account or something like that. They can buy it that way. So there's a lot of different ways that people can actually get involved and buy it now. It's become a lot easier than it was back in 2011 when I bought my first Bitcoin. And then the second way I would say is, if somebody who has a lot of wealth, they could follow some venture capitalist who's made couple 1,000% returns, and this is what they do all day, every day, and put their money with that venture capitalist or that fund. That's obviously a way to do that, and a number of family offices are doing. Investors are doing that. So there is a lot of money still flowing into cryptocurrencies, actually more than ever before. And so that's a second way you can do it. You could also, if you wanted to become more active, you could become a more short to medium term trader / investor in a number of different cryptocurrencies. They move often. One that I always tell people is, if you want to make money in any market, I don't care if it's a stock market or if it's, if it's commodities or cryptocurrencies, you have to be in something that has volatility, that's moving, that actually moves. The price of the price of it moves. Well, in the case of cryptocurrencies, they can be very volatile. They can move up or down tremendously in a very short period of time. So you do have to be cautious there. You never want to invest with money you can't afford to lose. But those are really kind of like the core opportunities. And then, of course, you can invest in blockchain type companies that are building technology that have the potential to change, whole industries, or in some cases to even change the way that our entire world system operates. And so, especially, when it comes to decentralized finance applications and things like that, that are really changing the way we look at monetary policy and things that go on even a government level. So there's opportunities there. There's obviously things now like NFTs, so you can invest in JPEGs, right, in digital art. And we've had this big explosion over the summer of NFTs, and a little bit more complex and complicated to navigate and to get into, but there are definitely ways to do it. And so, at just the core level, I would just say, look, buy some Bitcoin, buy some Ethereum, and be a buy and holder of some top coins. Put $1,000 into each, and just sit on. I remember when the market crashed at the end of 2017, the crypto market went from 20,000, and then it just started its dive all the way down to 700. At the time, it was like everybody was like, oh, crypto's going away. Well, we've seen cryptocurrency rebound over and over and over again. So you're going to have ups, you're going to have downs, but if people will just start putting a little bit of money into it, as an alternative investment, I would say, I think you're not going to be disappointed in 5 or 10 years.
I first really started to dive into crypto and blockchain. I remember it was like the summer of 2016. And when my boss was asking me about, how does this stuff work? And I think it's going to affect the media industry in some way. And so I started to do my initial research then, and bought my first crypto and just started to trade, and just fell in love with it.
DeFi.
DeFi.
Can you just give a broad overview of what that is for our audience?
Absolutely. Yeah, DeFi is an entire movement within the broader realm of cryptocurrency that's trying to disintermediate banks specifically. So right now, kind of the core primitives, the financial primitives that DeFi is trying to create are owned, right? So there's smart contracts out there like Aave, for instance, which, again, full disclosure, we're long Aave. We love that project. And what they're trying to do is match borrowers and lenders just through decentralized software, right? And so the job of a bank is to take your debit, right, or your the money that you put in there, your savings. They give you a 0.01% rate of return or 0.02% interest on those savings, and then they'll go out and they'll take your money, and guess what? They're going to lend it to Joe across the street who wants to get a mortgage, right, at 3%. And so you're like, whoa, there's a 3% mortgage, and then there's a 0.01% savings. So the disconnect? Well, banks, and even 25, right? And so why is the lender, right, me as a depositor at a bank, why am I not seeing any return in my money, right? Well, banks have massive overhead costs, right? They have 100,000 people operations. They got SAC cover. They got, office space. Let alone, they have a mandate, a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders to make them money. So when all this kind of comes down to brass tacks, you're like, well, the customer is the product, right? Just like how we are with Facebook. And people are realizing that, as everybody starts to revolt against Facebook because they use your data in different ways. And, I don't necessarily have a strong opinion on that right now. But with banks, I'm like, yeah, I think that at the end of the day, the lender absolutely see a higher rate of interest, and borrower also see low of interest as well, right, based on supply and demand. And so what we're seeing is kind of this explosion of peer-to-peer blend. It's really fascinating to see. It's like almost like, you know, peer-to-peer music sharing, file sharing way back in the day, right? Like we're using it here, but you're disintermediating, you know, the record companies in the same way. So that's one primitive of DeFi. And it's, you know, the other one is basically, you know, exchanges, right? And so being able to not just borrow and lend, but exchange asset for asset without another intermediary, right? And so all these kind of these ideas comprise this overarching theme called decentralized finance. That's what DeFi stands for, decentralized finance. And it's you know, it's unstoppable because the code isn't hosted on one company's server, right? It's not like Aave is a company. Aave, anybody who's Ethereum node all around the world. And so it's truly unstoppable. And, you know, if, for instance, like, you know, if you know, China bans DeFi, right? Or you know, they pretty much effectively have banned all crypto transactions. Well, you know, DeFi, it's like a hydra, right? You cut off one head, you're going to have 7 heads grow in its place. And a lot of people think, oh, well, you know, is the U.S. going to come crack down on DeFi? And there absolutely will be, you know, periods and different actions and stuff that they take against dinos, is what they're calling them. Dino means decentralized in name only. And so, you know, they are going to absolutely be going after some people. But again, you know, I think that this entire movement of DeFi is really just beginning, right? You know, I just checked this morning, total value locked in DeFi projects across Ethereum, Solana, Binance Smart Chain, Phantom, you know, a lot of these layer 1 protocols, $200 billion in total value locked. So that's like, again, peanuts compared to, you know, JP Morgan, for instance, which has a market cap of something like $400 billion. And it's like, so when you kind of take the total addressable market and you extrapolate it out, if you're at, you know, $200 billion of collateral in, this will be like trillions and trillions of dollars, right? The industry's $34 trillion. And so I think we've got a long way to go. I get really hyped up about DeFi just because, you know, I think that's where most of the upside is going to be in the market. But at the end of the day, this, you know, DeFi is absolutely unstoppable, and it's going to happen in one form or another, and it will take some market share from banks. It will take, you know, Western Union, you know, God bless them, you know, that's got to be a sinking ship, because, you know, they charge 20% on remittances, and now you could do it for free with Bitcoin and Lightning Network through Jack Mallers' Strike company, right? Or you could just send tokens across to your buddy's Ethereum wallet, and that's it. So I think that you know, the remittance game is pretty much dead in the water.
Yeah, and it's a perfect example of how you know, it brings benefits to the users of the system.
Right.
Whereas, you know, banks are the largest beneficiaries of banking. Not, you know, they provide us services as well. You know, there's an exchange of value, but whenever you take the middleman out, it gives margin back to both ends of the value chain.
Absolutely.
What was it that introduced you to cryptocurrencies?
Well, we have been rating banks, insurance companies, stocks, ETFs, and virtually everything that investors or savers, depositors might be interested in since 1971. As we get to 2017, it looked to us like cryptocurrencies were going to really go through the roof, because we looked at the previous cycles and it looked like 2017 was going to be the big year. At the same time, we saw that, we looked around was someone hyping up his own coin that he owned and bashing the coins of anyone else, or coins that he didn't own.
Right.
So there was this full wars between the Ripple, you know, versus the Bitcoinalists, and then there were the altcoin fans, and it was brutal. That's the only information you could find on the internet or anywhere. No Wall Street research firm was looking at it seriously. So if you're a serious investor and you're not just a millennial trying to throw a few bucks at this or that crypto, there was no place to go. Given that we had been on the cutting edge of many of the new developments and ratings in many areas, we'll be the first in crypto.
Excellent. That's great information. What are the different sectors of crypto that you're monitoring?
We're monitoring all the sectors,
Yeah.
including with an important emphasis on decentralized finance. Because decentralized finance, of all the use cases, has the biggest opportunity for investors, both long and short term. And the reason for that is very simple. Decentralized finance has the potential to challenge or compete with or even replace some share of the global financial system. We don't know if it's 1% or 10%, and we don't know how long it's going to take. But there's one thing we do know for sure, and that is the global financial system has approximately $400 trillion in assets.
That's a lot.
If decentralized finance can replace or compete with just 1% of the global financial system, which is very realistic, just a 1%, then that $100 billion is going to grow to $4 trillion. 1% of 400
That's right. Yeah, that's a lot.
right? So decentralized finance collectively, not one individual coin,
Right.
one individual project, will have $4 trillion in assets. That's different from market cap,
Right.
but it at least gives you a sense of how big it can be.
Yeah.
And again, I'm going to make a kind of a false comparison, but just to give you a sense. That $4 trillion in assets compares to just over $1 trillion in market cap for Bitcoin today. Right?
Yeah.
So that gives you just kind of a feel for the dimensions of
The
it.
scale of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If decentralized finance in the longer term can replace 10% or compete with 10% of the global financial system, now you're talking about $40 trillion in assets. And it looks like it's headed in that direction. It's growing very, very quickly. It's hard to say.
Wow. What are some of the driving forces behind the adoption of DeFi?
The one clear primary driving force is one 5-letter word.
Okay.
Yield.
Yield.
Yield. There are currently about 3 or 4 billion people in the world that have a banking account or that have some access to banking through their apps, not in the crypto world, but in this traditional financial
Centralized
world.
finance.
Right.
Yeah.
All of those people are being ripped off. All of us are being screwed by the financial system today because, hey, I have to put down $100,000 in a bank. I have to lock it up for 5 years. And they give me this thing called a jumbo certificate of deposit.
Right.
Right? A jumbo CD.
Mm-hmm.
If I do all of that, I put $100,000 down. I lock it up for 5 years. You know how much they pay me in interest?
How much?
They pay me the very best interest they can pay. It's the very best deal you can get.
Sounds exciting.
0.29%.
Ouch. And so, in the world of decentralized finance, there are better opportunities?
So compared to the 5-year CD, the rates you can get now in decentralized finance is close to about 20%. And that comes to about 67 or 70 times more than you can get on the 5-year jumbo CD.
Yeah, not quite 100, but wow, significant.
70 times more.
Wow.
You can also compare what you get in a decentralized finance to what you get in stock dividend yields.
Yeah.
The average stock dividend yield on the S&P 500 is about 1.3%, which comes with price risk because sure, the stock could go up, but if you're investing for yield, you want a stable investment.
Yeah.
And if the price of the stock goes down, your yield has been wiped out instantaneously in one day or in 2 days, so that your entire yield for the year has been wiped out, right?
Yeah.
In contrast, in the DeFi world, you can go on platforms that are quite reliable, get close to 20% interest by staking or providing liquidity with stablecoins.
Right.
And so in stablecoins, there's little or no price risk.
Yeah.
You're getting 20% yield, which is about 15 times more than you can get in stock dividends. And you don't have the downside risk if a crash in the stock or a crash in this case in the stablecoin. So let's sum up the advantages. Number one, you don't have to plunk down $100,000 to qualify for a higher yield. You can invest as little or as much as you want. I wouldn't even use the word invest. I would say deposit.
Yeah.
Number two, you don't have to commit to a particular time period. You're not locking up your funds for 5 years and then suffering withdrawal penalties if you want to cut out early.
Yeah.
You can, keep the money there for a day. You can keep it for 10 days, for forever, whichever you prefer.
Wow.
Number three, you're getting much more yield. You're getting a fair yield.
Yeah.
And 20% is the yield you can get on a stable, reliable platform. If you want to reach out for something that's maybe less reliable, you can get even more yields. But let's stick to the more conservative side, 20%.
Yeah.
So that's currently 67 times more than the average 6-month CD in the United States, which is about 0.19 or 0.17%. And last, and most important for anyone who is trying to build wealth rather than lose it, is that you don't have any, or you have virtually no price risk, virtually no risk of a crash. You don't have the opportunity for a big profit, but that's not our goal in this particular case. Most people are not looking for a place to speculate. They're looking for a place to just earn a decent yield. Just be rewarded for their liquidity and the money they've saved. And the demand for that right now is the biggest it's ever been in the history of. Because they're very concerned about safety and what the future of the world might bring. And at the same time, the central banks of the world have artificially shoved interest rates to practically zero. So all other competing interest rates, be it stock dividend yields or junk bond yields, have all fallen in tandem. So nearly 4 billion people looking for more yield. That's a lot of people.
Yeah, it is.
Those huge advantages, 67 times better. You're going to see a massive tidal wave. You're going to see a tsunami of money flood from the traditional banking system and financial system into decentralized finance, and it has already begun. This is the first time in the history of mankind that we have the opportunity for a technology to reverse, to change, to make a U-turn in these massive megatrends and take us back to a time, or take us back into a world where we can have the benefits of all the things that we've done and all the technologies we've made, but also have a better balance between centralization and decentralization, and still be completely organized and peaceful and efficient. Right. That is absolutely mind-boggling. That a technology has emerged that can actually transform society in multiple dimensions in a way that has never been possible since the emergence of mankind.
Now do you see why I had to share this story with you? We're in the very early days of these technologies, and no one knows exactly what the future holds. But the opportunity to do well by doing good has never been greater. Now let's examine the battle that's playing out today between central banks like the US Federal Reserve and Bitcoin, and why the stakes are much higher than most of us realize.
Where did you first come across Bitcoin?
In Chicago, when I was in college, I was studying economics and was interning at a managed futures fund. I forget exactly how I found it. I think it was actually just something as stupid as Googling like obscure monetary policy as I was studying economics, and stumbled upon Bitcoin. I think around that time too, like 2012, 2013. People were talking about the Silk Road a lot as that started to blow up, and I sort of fell down the rabbit hole there and just immediately caught my attention as I was studying economics, working at this fund where we traded currency markets, and so the idea of a currency native to the internet really caught my attention, especially as somebody who was a senior in high school in the fall of 2008 when the world was falling to shit in the financial sector. And I went to college to study economics with like a know your enemy mentality. So I think I went with an open mind to be receptive to solutions that were outside the traditional financial system.
So did you immediately jump in, or?
Like, I didn't buy my first Bitcoin immediately, but I definitely jumped in to the research end of things to understand how it worked, and try to consume as much content as I could around it, which was pretty sparse back in those days. And yeah, I just kept following it. When I was working at this fund, I was following, it was when Janet Yellen was the Fed chairwoman. And I think what really made me take a deeper look was one Fed meeting. There were like a bunch of traders were talking about how they were trading currency markets, and it wasn't because of the policy decisions that were made at the meeting. It was the color of Janet Yellen's jacket. I believe it was like purple. And they said the fact that she's wearing a purple dress or jacket at this meeting exudes power. So we're gonna trade markets this way. She's trying to send a message. And I was like, this probably isn't how currency markets should operate.
Right. But you had to have learned a lot while you were there. Does any of that kind of carry over to Bitcoin?
Yeah. I mean, I learned a lot in the sense that, like, when you're trading currency markets, I was an analyst, so I was tasked with writing commentaries on why the markets moved the way they did and why our fund performed in parallel to those market movements. And so I had to understand the policy decisions and the mechanics of monetary policy globally, not only the Federal Reserve, the ECB, Bank of Japan, PBOC, whatever it may be. And so I learned how these were these currencies that everybody used, and that juxtaposed to Bitcoin, which has no central authority or entity able to manipulate the way this monetary works. It really started to give my attention, my respect, and I think I came to the conclusion it's the way a monetary system should probably work compared to the fiat monetary system, which is able to be manipulated pretty easily by a very select few people, and that manipulation has ripple effects throughout the world that I would argue are immoral and affect the poor the most.
Absolutely, I 100% agree. So Bitcoin was a solution that was moral.
Yeah, and around the same time was when WikiLeaks was blowing up as well, with email drops and everything in the news. Again, with mentality, know your enemy. It feels like the system's just rigged against the small guy, and so WikiLeaks particularly was a big part of Bitcoin's early story, where they were to accept Bitcoin for donation. Your depositor and bank providers cut them off from access money. And so Bitcoin being there as a solution for WikiLeaks specifically was really powerful, probably a powerful moment in my journey now that I think back. Like, I was like, all right, this thing works. Like, people are sending money to WikiLeaks. There's nothing the CIA, the FBI, or the governments around the world can do about it. And they really want to prevent this entity from receiving money, but they can't stop Bitcoiners from sending them Bitcoin. Very powerful in proving that Bitcoin does what it says it does. Because right, you have the asset, which is scarce. It's implementing a sound monetary policy in the digital age, and then you have the network, which is distributed and enables you to make the transactions that the authorities don't want you to make.
Yeah, what was it about Bitcoin that really made it stand apart in a category of its own to you?
But yeah, I think Satoshi, the way he launched it and the way it came to be, was very pure, right? These things are going to succeed. Arguably, they already are, threatening governments and central authorities' control, not only over the monetary system. Once you lose control, central control over a monetary system, that you lose control over things that are downstream.
I get the sense that you see Bitcoin as something bigger than, just money. Like, what kind of impact do you think Bitcoin is going to have on society?
Bitcoin it's the greatest extension of natural rights since the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, whatever you want to pinpoint as the extension of natural rights that were afforded to us when the Founding Fathers created America. Bitcoin protects private property in the digital age better than anything that's ever existed on this planet, whether it be digital or meat space related. And so for me, Bitcoin I got into it for the money, like literally for the sound money, and because I think it's wiser to run society on a sound monetary policy. But now I'm in it for freedom.
You're a professor and you teach blockchain and cryptocurrencies. How did you get into that?
Well, I've been at DePaul University for about 8 years, and prior to that, I was an economist with the Federal Reserve. So my background is in money and banking, and so it was actually money and banking courses that got me started. I teach about the history of money and also the future of money, and my students were the ones who started asking me about Bitcoin and when are we going to talk about Bitcoin? And so I now incorporate that in all of my courses. And then the graduate course on blockchain and crypto, I started 3 years ago to focus specifically on this topic.
What transitioned us from, a Federal Reserve-backed currency or created currency to cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, so I tell people, I think this is a natural evolution of money. A lot of people think this is very new and sometimes strange. It's like funny money or it's not real. But, this is, I think, a progression that we've been seeing for decades now. So if you go back to like 1971, that was when the US dollar went off the gold standard under Richard Nixon. We just marked the 50-year anniversary of that. So the US dollar is what's called a fiat currency. It is not pegged to any physical commodity. It only has value because it's backed by the faith and credit of the US government. And, we have become very comfortable with physical bills, like a $20 bill that we can put in our pocket. But most people don't pay with cash anymore. We've been moving towards this thing called the cashless society for a number of years now. Other countries are even further along in that direction. My students, most of them don't even own a wallet. They just, they pay for stuff using their phone. And so, we've seen this progression from physical cash to electronic payments. And I think now with crypto, what we're seeing is electronic cash. So that's really, it's physical cash, electronic payments, electronic cash. So it functions like cash, but it exists on the internet as a means of virtual payment. And so we're moving towards this form of digital money. And I think as we move towards the digital economy, it only makes sense that we would see that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of people, kind of a question about what gives
say, Bitcoin value?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of people who would say it has no value, and that if you buy it, you're a fool because it's it's a Ponzi scheme. Warren Buffett has come out and said very critical things about it, which is understandable. Bitcoin doesn't produce anything. There's no cash flow, not like a stock or a bond, and so I think there are some people that question crypto assets as an investment because they don't produce anything, but they are more like a commodity. So under regulatory frameworks, Bitcoin has been labeled as a commodity, not a security, but it is still an investable asset. And I think the value really comes from its role as money. So again, people tend to think the US dollar has value, but it's not backed by anything. And if you look at gold has no intrinsic value. It's not very good at conducting electricity. It's very malleable, so it's not very strong. And so it really only has value because people attribute value to it, and because it is scarce and has become a store of value. So I think Bitcoin in particular is transitioning into more of a digital gold, something that doesn't have any intrinsic value, but people can use it as a store of value. And the value really comes from the network. I think to understand the crypto market, you have to understand what are called network effects. The more people who use it and adopt it, the more it can function as a transfer of value, where I can buy and sell with it. I can provide money to other people using this. And so as that network grows, the value will increase. So again, part of what I love about this, and I think why you're interested in this and so many people are interested in this, is cryptocurrency is money without banks and without governments. And some people like governments owning and controlling money because it gives them comfort that someone is there watching and the buck stops here, so to speak. But there's a huge history of governments mismanaging money for the wrong reasons. Some were printing money, producing hyperinflation. Zimbabwe, it gets out of control. Then people say, well, the US is different. We never have any of those problems. But if you look back over those 50 years, when we went off the gold standard, 1970s, huge inflation, double digit here in the US. Most of us now have forgotten that ever happened. And it was really Paul Volcker, chairman of the Federal Reserve, who raised interest rates and got that under control. And so, since the Greenspan days, we've had inflation targeting. The Fed has managed to keep inflation roughly around 2% or just below. But, 2 episodes, I think, have started to raise questions about that. One was the global financial crisis, 2008, 2009. Quantitative easing, QE1, QE2, QE3, massive increases in the money supply. And there were some people who said, well, this is going to lead to crazy inflation because, the Fed's just printing too much money. And we didn't see that. So, if you look back over that period following the crisis, inflation remained quite low. But that was really a global phenomenon. The entire kind of international financial system was struggling with low price growth. But during COVID, inflation is starting to tick up. And so I think there's questions about, is this sustainable? And to me, that brings to the point of do you want someone managing the money supply? Our current system with central banks is they have full discretion over whether to increase or reduce the money supply. Some people like that because then they can manage the economy. They can provide more or less as it warrants. But what I love about crypto is it's entirely transparent. It's all in the code, in the protocol. And so the supply of Bitcoin is increasing at this very steady rate. And there's no kind of wizard behind the curtain that's kind of controlling that. And so supply, you know what you're going to get. And so the price fluctuations are all about demand, which I think is kind of how it should be. Many people in the kind of the financial markets today would say that central banks have become too active, that the Fed is intervening too often. And so the U.S. stock market, S&P 500, a lot of that's driven by the Fed. And so it's not about corporate earnings or profitability. The whole market rises and falls based on monetary policy. And so if we can shift towards a monetary policy that's more kind of basic, transparent, and less interventionist, then like you said, we could arguably move back towards a more free market economy.
Time alone will tell how this battle plays out, but one thing's certain. These technologies are on a collision course with the powers that be of today, and neither side is backing down. At the forefront of that struggle are government regulators who have taken a wide-varying approach with their little problem. Our next guest, United States Congressman Davidson, is one of a handful of politicians who actually understand just how much good it can do for America. You may be shocked as he shares the power struggle going on at the highest levels of our government and terrified by some of the things that could be done with this technology in the wrong hands.
From your kind of inside perspective, I think a lot of people are concerned that, crypto is too disruptive, that, the government's going to come in and shut it down. Is that even a realistic possibility at this point?
Well, some of my colleagues certainly want that to be the case, and they look to China for other things too. I mean, they're kind of authoritarian in their approach. They don't see themselves that way, but look, China wants to control their economy. They want to use money and their payment system as a means of control over their population. What should money be used as? It should be used as a store of value and a means of exchange. That's really the part that the federal government is most focused on. My fear is that they're so focused on that they kill the use cases that could come from permissionless transactions. So let me differentiate that. So permissionless like cash, right? So if I pull out my old school leather wallet and I could trade you $20 for something that we agree on. There's no third party to the transaction, your bank, my bank, the federal government, anybody else. If you, however, use a bank account, well, there's a third party involved. And this brings in the third party doctrine. And the federal government uses that third party doctrine to essentially spy on all the financial transactions. And that's how we solve lots of crimes. That's how we enforce sanctions and all kinds of things. And so there are people that are very fearful that America's power of the dollar as the world's reserve currency could be undermined by some other system. Now, the reality is there is another system. It's developing anyway. And even with the cash, they don't stop it. I mean, the bigger problem is already cash. It's not that crypto. Crypto is literally traceable. That's how they solved the Colonial Pipeline case, for example. So those are the people that are most fearful and the best argument for why they want to take it down. Some of the other arguments aren't as good, and it's simply that, well, this would disrupt banks, and banks don't want to be disrupted.
Do you think we'll see a central bank digital currency?
It's still so early that a lot of people don't really even know what a central bank digital currency is. People in this space probably do, but a lot of my colleagues are like, what is this that they're talking about? And there in theory could be a way to do a central bank digital currency that's like Bitcoin. It has all the properties. It's an immutable distributed ledger. It establishes trust in the same sort of way. It's not a centralized database. But what's gaining traction is a central bank digital currency where the central bank, not your bank, but the federal government, controls the money very directly. They control the deposits, and they could therefore filter transactions. This is the system that China is working on, and it's the creepiest surveillance tool known to man, and they're coupling it with their social credit score. So people don't get credit based on their ability to repay, but on whether or not the Chinese Communist Party thinks they're good citizens or not. Now, as crazy as it is, there are some of my colleagues who look to that kind of system with envy because it gives the Chinese Communist Party a lot of pull over their society. And if we don't develop an alternative to that, if we just develop something that's similar and competes with China's version, the whole planet's going to be dominated with that kind of money. What we really want is hard currency. Why is the US dollar the reserve currency? It's viewed as the best representation for, oil. You think about the petrodollar, all the commodities, not just oil, are settled in dollars globally. And so there's a strong desire to have this. And historically, money flows to the hardest currency. You see Bitcoin being adopted even as legal tender in El Salvador and a lot of interest in it in other countries. Why would that be? Well, because it's very hard currency. You don't see central banks diluting the value of it by creating massive new supplies. All these kinds of things will undermine the US dollar if we don't change course. We could embrace something that's like Bitcoin with a central bank digital currency. It would restore privacy, and it would as even for investment, where instead of an authoritarian system that's going to create a surveillance tool, you would do what America has done that's attracted people from all over the world anyway. We're the land of opportunity. We're not an oppressive, and I think that's the policy debate right now, is whether or not to have a solid simplicity, and if we did, what would be the nature of it?
See happening right now that gives you the most hope?
Well, I mean, there is, and the space. Look, it's $2.5 trillion, not just Bitcoin itself, but blockchain, the world it's inspired, took up $2.5 billion of value. Now that would have gone somewhere, but look at our stock market. It's already, people think, look at the price to earnings ratios; they're massively inflated. It's creating the distortion of the money that I just talked about with the Federal Reserve. Ray Dalio is the guy, big hedge fund manager, Bridgewater Capital, that's trash. What did he mean? Governments are destroying cash. So you have to take that cash and put it in something. It has to be put in something that's going to provide value. Some of the other commodities like gold haven't really seen the same run. Part of it is because there's an alternative asset class that's more liquid. And so when you look at the liquidity that's available in crypto, not only can it serve as a store of value, it can be highly liquid. And to me, it has the prospect of restoring some level of privacy to our financial system. But beyond that, the number of use cases that are being inspired. I mean, I look at America, look historically, we're 5% of the world's population. We have like 25% of the world's GDP. We have over 50% of the invested capital in our capital markets. How do we do that? If you go back to the agricultural revolution America led, the industrial revolution America led, we created the automobile age, the aviation age, the aerospace age, computing, led the internet revolution. And now it's really the era is fintech. You look at all the financial innovation in the world, and we're poised to really lead in that too. But Congress can't get the clarity. The regulators can't provide the clarity. And if we do not take action, we're going to miss this moment. The innovation's still going to happen. There's no guarantee it's going to happen in America.
What can, the average American person do to, be a part of this and kind of create, to just contribute to this movement? And
well, I think one thing, if you find a use case that you're passionate about, whether that's Bitcoin or any number of the other products that are out there that are in the space, that as a system like Solana or something like that, Ether, people are passionate about, XRP. But there are things like Helium where they're trying to create a decentralized cell phone network. There are charities that are out there raising money. So find a use case and host your own node. And people say, what does host your own node mean? Well, most people have an account-based relationship with their bank or their retirement savings or their cell phone carrier or anything else. The real potential for this is permissionless systems, and that comes from actually hosting something yourself and engaging and participating in it, and you can earn rewards for doing it, but you really help it exist, and it exists in a more resilient way. So I think, host your own node, whatever use case you're most passionate about, and then get connected to elected officials so that they understand what you're doing and why it's important and why it really has the chance to change the world.
I think you'll agree It's critically important to make sure that we, the people, get control of this technology, not authoritarian elites who'd love nothing more than the ability to delete your bank balance when you don't comply. The fact is, this technology, the ideas that are driving it and the people behind it, the rapid adoption rate and the troubles of our time could all converge suddenly and quickly change life as we know it, even the way we govern ourselves. What impact will crypto have at the nation-state level? Let's explore the possibilities together.
You've done all these, businesses, you've been very successful, and then you learned about, wealth management. What was your first exposure to crypto?
Right after I launched that second business at the November of 2010, and I don't remember where I came across it, but I did at some point, and heard about Bitcoin, thought about buying some, had to get online and talk to somebody on a forum or, a blog, and it's like, hey, wire me money or send me money and I'll send you, these Bitcoins, figure out how to set up a wallet. And I was like, it wasn't quite structured enough for me to do that, which was obviously the dumbest mistake I've ever made. But I did get into it in 2013. So I bought my first Bitcoin in February of 2013. I wired $30,000 to Mt. Gox, and I bought 400 Bitcoin. And it was around $75 a Bitcoin at that point. The next year, that sounds amazing, until the next year in 2014 when Mt. Gox was hacked and I lost that Bitcoin. And so very valuable lesson learned there.
Where do you see this tech being the most disruptive or the most impactful?
Everywhere. Money and gaming. It's interesting now because everything can become money. What we haven't seen yet, and I think will probably be a dominant narrative next time, is the fact that you can tokenize any asset on the planet. Whether it's my car or my house or the boat or the business or the piece of art or the record collection or whatever it may be, or myself as an individual, every asset can be tokenized. And what that is going to do is it's going to unlock hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of dormant value that's exists in the world today, isn't on a stock exchange.
Right.
There's going to be an exchange for everything in the next few years, and that's going to change the world. From a money perspective, what we see now with El Salvador, now we hear rumors of Brazil adopting Bitcoin as a legal tender. Bitcoin has the power to destroy nation states. And I think that was its original vision, by Satoshi, and kind of, the clues and the breadcrumbs that he left. And it's interesting because some nation states like China have already come to that conclusion. And other countries, like the United States, at least now, crypto's already infected our financial system and our consumer base. And so can it be removed? I don't think so. It can only be joined. And I think you want to do that, because trying to ban crypto is like trying to ban the internet. Good luck, especially if the rest of the world continues to adopt it. And so Bitcoin has the opportunity to become the dominant form of money on the planet. And it's going to, because of that, destroy all of the other fiat currencies that exist. Fiat currencies are the primary tool by which governments have waged war, controlled populations, bought and controlled other politicians, and therefore the laws that have been passed. And if you take that tool away from them, they're really no longer necessary. And then you add the security and transparency of blockchain technology when it comes to voting, and now the power is truly in the people's hands, and in every way that matters. The question is, will governments allow that to happen
right?
Willingly, or are they going to put up a fight? And I think the United States doing now. Other countries like El Salvador are fully adopting it, and the countries that do that are going to be the primary recipients of that transition of power and wealth and value. And so there's going to be a competitive landscape, which is then going to incentivize countries like the United States to maybe back off a little bit. So it's going to be the fight of our lifetime, let alone for the future of humanity. And I do believe that is what is at stake right now. Either we move forward into a free system that is controlled, or lockdown and it becomes, frankly, a safe planet where this technology can also be used for control and for evil in an unprecedented way. And that's the fight that is taking place right now, and that will be resolved within the next 9 years.
What is going to make its way into government?
I think it works two ways, actually. I think it certainly makes gradual progress in increasing the transparency of government. And yet what I think maybe catches people off guard is that, as is the case with so many technological innovations, it's new types of blank, whatever blank is, that grow up native in the new technology soil. And so it's not so much that blockchain has an impact in existing structures, which it certainly will, but that wholly new structures, for example, of governance, and wholly new institutions rise up that in some sense can supersede the role that, again, since now governments now take. And so I'm not, in a political sense, I don't subscribe to philosophy of anarchism, but I suggest that just as with significant inventions like it's going to lead to a reshift and a reinterpretation of rightful of government in particular areas. And those governments are able to flex rather than bend, rather than break, are the ones that stand to benefit the most. You already earlier referred to this dilemma that some governments feel they're facing. Do I maintain and then, as a result, drive out innovators to other green pastures? Or do I encourage the innovation to occur on my home turf at the cost of having to cede some of what I previously, as a government, speaking anthropomorphically, what I previously thought was my right and title? But again, we've seen this play out before. One of my favorite examples of this, we've so much distance historically on that we can laugh about, is the time, I think, in the 15th century, in Asia, a certain the kingdom was just being introduced to mechanical, and it was perceived as a threat to the government that individuals should own mechanical clocks. Why? Because, well, part of the reason it's involved, but one of the reasons that I find the most interesting was there was a worry that if individuals had mechanical clocks, then they could synchronize uprisings, they could synchronize rebellions. And yet, with the next 100 years of history between us and the invention of the mechanical clock, no government day worry about the fact that people walk around with wristwatches. Okay? And so, to me, it's a story that's useful in a couple of ways. One, it suggests that people, if you will, worry too much. But two, it suggests that the role of government is an enduring one, and it can adapt to technological innovation. It doesn't need to fear its existence just because mechanical clocks are now available. It enduring role, and so long term, we'll still have governments, and it'll all be a blockchain. Be terrific. We could enhance that we had in election. I mean, I know that we're leaning at the start of the thing, and maybe I went all the way around the barn to get there, but absolutely. I can't think of any government record that's more important than the voting record. Everyone having some political persuasion which candidate they wanted for this or that office, everyone having confidence that the system worked correctly. And paying a favor back that blockchain is because if you think about it, when you go back in the United States history, 250 years, whatever, to the Constitution, this was at a time where who was in charge of the government was determined by who had the power to beat militarily effectively. And the whole idea of a constitution was quite a radical experiment. But in hindsight, we should see the Constitution itself as the original decentralized peer-to-peer algorithm for consent. That whole notion of the rule of law certainly should benefit from the blockchain, since the blockchain is really paying back debt that original note. It didn't have to just be someone charged by dint of force, that we could have a continuing algorithm and centralized consensus that allow peaceful transitions of authority. So, can help.
Originally tried to some through like $4,000. And it was actually at Ron Paul got my first $5 for the big
this and
right now we're already seeing kind of regulatory bodies and politicians involved in the bill. You need to push back into that regulation doesn't hamper this technology in this country. I see the infrastructure bill, the way it's written, as very poor regulation. And then fundamentally, a distributed ledger allows for us to permanently record what is done in our governance systems. And, politicians like to say one thing and do another, and you can't really hold them to account necessarily, especially with systems that record what they're doing, they set thing or sense making. If in voting, we can, seed our delegate responsibility, but we can eventually say we want to, we don't want those people making decisions that we want them to do. If they don't, we will go to someone else. And right now, you get someone elected, and you can try to get office, but you can't really do that, and it takes 4 years, and so many, like, the technology, everything moves much faster than that now. So with, like I would say, with the distributed governance, we'll be able to withdraw consent within governance much faster.
You view it as a possibility this
being honest with ourselves, all government should be operating on a distributed ledger as soon as possible. Instead, if you want to hold things accountable, if you want to have anti-corruption, allow for that. That doesn't mean that the government wants to implement it quite yet. You need to have people in power that, want to help implement those things. And, the generation is kind of Gen X, and the millennial generation is going to come into power in the next, 5 to 10 years, where we're going to be the elected officials. And, those people understand the corruption of the system, as well as that allow us to fix societal problem and make.
When did you start?
I got into crypto with Amazon in 2011. The first person that showed it to me, we were at one of their data centers, and had his own system running. Totally breaking our NDA. I mean, it was one of those things where most people in this space, especially like nerds and engineers, I went home and just stayed up for basically 2 days straight, Googling it, looking at the code, just being like this. I had like a moment back then of like, this is something.
It feels inevitable to me that we move to decentralized finance in a lot of ways. And in a lot of ways, Bitcoin is like kind of the heart, the original DeFi, is it replacing banks as the issuers of currency.
I really like the decentralized version of the DeFi aspect for like governance, because I think finance will always work itself out because it has incentives. I think governance in DeFi is super, super interesting.
Yeah, far-reaching implications, that's for sure.
Yeah, just because like you can, the potential to like boot somebody out that doesn't do good things in current law is extraordinarily hard. But if you have a community that all fully agrees, to a consensus to do something, having it being able to happen very quickly, I mean, that's powerful. Because typically, I don't need to talk politics too much, but typically you have guys that are in office that are so disconnected from the world. Like, whether they tell you or not, they're extraordinarily wealthy. They're immediately out of a huge amount of the American bracket, and they don't understand what the fuck is going on anymore.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm not saying that old dudes can't like be up to date, but I would say a lot of them aren't. And they do a good job campaigning, which is a bracket on itself. And once people actually start seeing them in their office seat, it's like, holy shit, I like her. And so the decentralized aspect of streamlining, getting into a position that they should be, and then potentially keeping them or exiting them. Why the Bitcoin code is so great, because the peers are incentivized to run, and the network is incentivized by the peers. And if you just kind of flip that into government, have like an extraordinarily awesome system.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's where my mind goes. frequently because technology is a long ways type of government,
Right.
and it seems like we could probably be newer technology.
I would hope so. We can't fucking vote online. What the hell? What?
We can't. Yeah, no, we can't count the votes. Like it's 2021.
Like,
Really?
think about that. Here's your private key and your public. I mean, it's already logged on and was like, hey, I didn't actually vote. There wouldn't not be a hard system, honestly.
If you're still with me, you realize it's not another internet meme. This is a group of technologies with a variety of capabilities that enable us to achieve our highest ideals to a degree never possible before this kind of technology existed. It's revolutionary because a system that's left over from the pre-net world. But we, the people, have to play our part. We have to participate and steer it towards this series because we each have a duty to leave the world better than we found it. And that starts with accepting certain truths and keeping an open mind. Enjoy the water while taking it one by one. Forced compliance became the new normal. All wrong speech was thought criminals were canceled. All the while, we're told it's all being done by benevolent elites out of their love for the little people, for our protection. Before crypto, there was no way to take back the rights that were stolen from you. But thanks to the work of highly motivated crypto entrepreneurs, the everyday person now has the power to wrest back their natural rights. Pay close attention to what you're about to witness. This is where the rubber meets the road in the battle of wealth and power.
How important do you think that is to kind of returning sovereignty to individuals?
Well, I sometimes we're at a point where we may not be able to, but I'm very interested in new technologies. I think that censorship is never the answer. Even with speech that you don't like, I mean, people get mad at Nazi speech. It's like, this is why you need free speech rules. So you can say, that doesn't make sense. We should maybe think of a different idea. And through the exchange of ideas, I mean, how can you possibly have a society without being able to freely exchange those ideas? I feel like it's a mark of civilization. It's never been, like, the good guys are never the censorship monsters, right? And then some people might say something like, oh, well, if you have nothing to say, and that becomes more of a privacy concern, but, if you have nothing to say, then, nothing to hide, then why not? I think that censorship is a big concern of mine. I think that of course, brought a lot of people together with crypto. There's censorship resistance is an underlying theme, and we're absolutely going to need to have that. You can't just have censorship because that has never historically been a good outcome for people, right? It's in our interest to be able to be truthful with one another, and if the idea is poor, then it should fall on its merit and not because it's being censored. In fact, one might argue that through censorship, you make certain ideas even more attractive because they become forbidden, whereas they just need the light of day in order to show whether or not they're a good one or a bad one.
This was such a massive inspiration for me to do this because I look up and I see the censorship happening on these massive social platforms, and you feel powerless to do anything about it. And yet history tells us just how harmful censorship can be, and it can lead to terrible things. And I caught a glimpse of what Web3 could be and how it could be decentralized and take that power out of the hands of the few.
That's the thing, is like, we talk to creators almost every day, and what every creator has effectively done across the world is that they've built a mansion in someone else's backyard without a rental agreement. And at any time, the landlord can decide, you got to go.
Yeah.
And they can basically erase from the entire planet. This year, when I started, I would tell my friends, I said, at the beginning of 2020, and what's going to happen is one of the most powerful people we know on the internet is going to be wiped off the face of the earth, and you're going to see how powerful censorship is. And then the thing happens on January 6th, and then everyone bans the president of the United States. I'm not for his politics by any means, but that's an example of what we're dealing with, is that you can basically, at the whim of a few companies, disappear off the face of the earth. Not just a regular person, the person that's running arguably the most powerful country in the world. That's a very powerful thing to think about.
Just to continue on what happened in January of this year, the platform risk was made really evident when Parler was taken down.
Yeah.
They sat on the infrastructure of a handful of tech companies and
one.
Yes.
And from what I heard, Parler didn't just have, their code wasn't backed up anywhere. Everything was on AWS, and once AWS turned it off, they had to go find their code again.
So I know that there's a tremendous sense of frustration out there by the users of these existing social platforms. I mean, and they would leave Facebook if they could.
I think the big reframe to start having is that as a society, we have to start thinking of sovereignty in a much bigger way. The current state of not only just the internet, but every general system is we've allowed control to be given up for convenience.
Yeah.
And I think that we are constantly pushing for convenience in our society. We give banks all of our money because we don't want to have responsibility. We order certain things on the internet because we don't want to go purchase things. We've tried to make our lives easier with all these mechanisms, but with that we've given up a tremendous amount of control and a tremendous amount of our own sovereignty.
Yeah.
And I think if we want to take back our human sovereignty, we have to first take back our attention, and we have to first take back our data and our usage on the internet.
One of the things that I think a lot about is how technology changes human behavior. Basically, the last 15 years or so, we've been inundated in sort of like a very weird digital world where everything is centralized, and we're in an environment that is not natural to human nature. It's just very different than what we would think of as human. So, we have these digital profiles of ourselves on Facebook or something like that. And it induces a certain level of human behavior that's not natural, right? Like, I know like a lot of people on Instagram feel the need to make their life look a little more glamorous, right? So they will purposefully do things that they might not even like or think is worth it, but it's a way to sort of like humble brag on Instagram or something, right? It changes incentives quite a bit. A large part of the incentives on these platforms is this idea of free, right? Like everything is free. And I'll never forget like this conversation that I had with Tae Young-ho, and he is the highest ranking North Korean official to have ever defected. And I was having a conversation with him at the Oslo Freedom Forum a few years ago. We were just talking about different stuff and, like North Korea and everything else. So I was like, hey, so how did Kim Il-sung gain all this power? Like, how do you get to be a totalitarian state? Like, what's sort of the process? And he said, well, here's the real secret. You give things away for free. I was like, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, they basically made everything free. You get free healthcare, you get free education, you get a free house, the government makes sure you have a job, everything else. And people loved it at first because you got free healthcare, you got free education, you got free whatever. Thing is, it wasn't really free. And he said that the price of free is compliance. And in particular, compliance to the regime. So what ended up happening is that, yeah, you didn't pay for it with money, but you still pay for it with something else. And all of these people started serving the regime. You basically got
owned by the regime through the free stuff, because the minute you dissent, none of that free stuff is free anymore. In fact, you can't get any of it. There's no price at which you can buy any of that. And that made me think, wow. And that is so crazy. And he's like, this is why I like market transactions. There's something sacred about market transactions. When you pay for something, both people have an obligation to each other. When you pay for something, like the company that you pay to has an obligation towards you, and you're able to pay that over. And it's a mutual thing. Whereas if it's free, it's a one-way dependence. It's a fast track to slavery, which absolutely blew my mind, right? Like it's such an amazing insight. And afterwards, I was reflecting on this a little bit. And I was like, okay, where do we get stuff for free? Well, we get our Google Gmail for free. We get Facebook for free. We get like Twitter for free. We get all these web services for free. What's the cost? We're the product, right? We're the product. Facebook doesn't care about you. They care about all the advertisers. That's their customer, because there's actually a market transaction. The advertisers actually pay Facebook, and Facebook serves them users. Like that you're the product. It's such a different way to sort of like see the world, but once you see it, you can't unsee it, because all of what is around us, like we tend to think we live in a capitalist society or whatever. I actually think we're in a very socialist one in many ways, because we are getting things for free. It's just that it's a different kind of socialism where they sell us to other people, and we are manipulated in so many ways through propaganda, images, and everything else, so that we serve the needs of those things that we get for free. This is why Google, Facebook, Twitter, and all these things that we get for free, they're so powerful, because there's an inherent dependence on those platforms, on those companies. And I'm picking on big tech, but this is true of a lot of other things, right? Like, especially government, where if you do get something for free, like it causes dependence. It forces you to be compliant, and we're seeing that a lot with like these vaccine mandates and things like that, right? Where they're talking about like taking away healthcare for those that don't get vaccinated. They're talking about taking away your job if you're not vaccinated. I mean, it's going to be property next, right? Like, you're not allowed to live in this neighborhood unless you're vaccinated or something like that. I mean, this is tyranny. This is what kind of happens, and this is what Bitcoin is there for, to resist this kind of stuff. Where, when you have, transactions between people, it becomes something sacred. It becomes obligations towards your fellow man. And in a sense, this is what allows people to interact with one another in civilization. It's this transactions that go back and forth. And paying for something is a good thing, is ultimately what I'm saying.
That's amazing. That was incredible. Great insights. And it's, again, like this is why I'm creating this series, because I do believe that this is the fight for the future.
We've covered a lot of ground in one episode, and we're just getting started. Crypto will disrupt every part of our society and economy, restore wealth that was confiscated through inflation, and uber powerful institutions. Neither governments nor central banks can control or stop mass adoption, but they can prevent their citizens from receiving their share of the wealth, or use central bank cryptos to control their citizens. Crypto will reshape the world as we know it. It can bring about a future world where equal access to opportunity, transparency, and fairness are the norm, but only if we do our part. If you haven't done so already, share the series with someone you think should see this. And remember, at any time you can purchase the series for on-demand viewing. If it's during the world premiere event, we've got some really special extras for you when you do. But of course, there's no pressure. You can watch the entire series for free, one day at a time, as each episode is released. Thank you for sharing the series with others and your time with me today. Here's a preview of what's coming up in episode 2.
I'll go on record as saying that Bitcoin is a failed use case. It is not a good medium of exchange. It's too expensive and it takes too much time.
It is a very expensive, slow database that's very difficult to change. And the reason why it is because those are all good properties for money. You want it to be very difficult to change. You don't want this ability to defraud people because it's difficult to change and so on. Like, that's great for money because it gives you the ability to plan for the future very well, because you know what the value of the money that you're holding is going to be worth.
The financial system that we currently have is a financial system of walled gardens and permissioned environments and incumbents. And so making a name for yourself or scaling up the ladder of the traditional financial world, it's almost impossible these days. And that's why so many people feel marginalized and left out. You can't access some of the upside that Wall Street has accessed because they figured out how to put up walled gardens.
You know, I always tell people you have 48 million millionaires in the world, and there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins. And there's about 18.5 million in circulation. If you get your hands on half a Bitcoin or one Bitcoin, you're front running the millionaire class in the world.
At the end of the day, you know, we've been talking about e-cash for 100 years with sci-fi novels and futurists. The people that, you know, were coding internet protocol in the 70s left a place in it for value transfer. You can still get a 402 error. 404 is page not found, 402 is value not found. That's been there for 45 years or something like that.
I think right now we're living through the largest adoption of technology that we will ever see in human history, right now. And we can all be a part of it, and we can all invest in it in the blockchain. I'm getting excited just talking about this. I think anybody who's even looking at this space or watching content about this space is in an incredible space right now to invest in it.
And there's another thing that I always told myself. That is that if I find something as revolutionary as the internet, at some point in my life, I will dedicate my life to it. And when I saw Ethereum, I thought, oh, this is it. Wow, this is it. This is as big as the internet, maybe bigger. So this is what I'm going to do.